sometimes certain teams give a very specific aura where they are hitting the next echelon of play, and while it's not going to be completely apparent, there will be signs. And I think Fnatic is showing some of these signs right now, and that's going to be what I'm covering in today's game against BDS, the big dick suckers. No, I'm just kidding. No flame here. But it's just LEC recent round one still. Fnatic have been doing pretty well with this roster. Of course, slot for slot, they have really strong players. Like, this is a team like just full of experience and a lot of players that are willing to work with each other. But I want to specifically talk about how their draft is one that's contextually catered to teams that are able to unlock this sort of new style, right? So, what do I mean by this? Well, not mention too much about the bans because I think it's very, very subjective across a lot of different teams. What isn't subjective is this Vibe B1 because it is locked by them, right? They lock it in, and we usually, the dynamic between the Vibe B1 and then what the team responds with is you're going to create conditions to minimize the guaranteed engage that Vibe brings, right? Because that is one thing. Absolutes in draft are usually pretty strong, right? Because you can force certain things to happen. And then when you force certain things to happen and you are able to capitalize on those guarantees, you become a very, very consistent team. And despite the weaknesses of those things, you are able to play around it thanks to your excellent execution, right? So another example of this would be champions with really strong matchup spreads and really good laning, right? So the LeBlancs of the world, Renekton, right? People, Varus, for example, as well, Kalista. People crave these champions because, of course, the best dictator for what the only bottleneck for champions like this is how well you can play it, right? Essentially. And that's why usually when you get ahead and you gain advantages with champions like this, you're usually just typically the better player, right? Because that is going to be a very important skill for determining whether you can win the game or not, right? So that's why it's so coveted, right? And being able to maintain that advantage. You can see that a lot of the aforementioned champions are already in this game, right? Like, look at that, right? So basically what BDS are going to respond with is securing the strongest matchups as possible, and then potentially using their R4 and R5 slots to catch Fnatic when they make their pivot picks, if they want to decide to go full forwards, if they're, how much they're leaning towards each type of composition, and then respond accordingly, right? So they actually commit to the Braum on 4 because they get the Rel confirmed on B3. So as you suspect, they're trying to minimize the amount of the Vi engage, right? And it's actually really solid for BDS because they have arguably up to 3 winning lanes, right? Look, we have Varus Braum on bot side, which is going to be able to suppress the Kalista Rel really well. Renekton Nidalee creates really strong top side, and then you get R5 mid lane, right? So on paper, just straight champions. And by the way, Jace made it through the entire draft. So there's clearly some priority differences here, but clearly, you can see BDS basically got the entire cherry picked draft that they wanted to go for. And if I'm Fnatic and I'm not a team that plays as well as Fnatic does, I'd be pretty scared because the margin for error, let's say, for BDS is pretty large, right? Where it's a very safe comp. You can play around a lot of different things. You can just have to chill and scale, right? But Fnatic do a really good job of being able to address these needs because when they establish the baseline of the draft, being with the Vibe B1, they're forcing BDS to actually think about this way of drafting. And they could, and because they're forcing BDS to almost draft like betas, they're not giving them a chance to actually reflect their own playstyle and gain advantages, force advantages. It's Fnatic's game to lose, and that's why something like the Vibe B1 can be so commanding, right? Because you are calling the shots, you are dictating the game pace and the draft. So you're making the first moves, and you're forcing the enemy to just respond to you, and you're getting the type of draft that you want. You can see that they actually hedge fairly well against this because the main issue with the Fnatic comp was the fact that they would probably lose front to back, so they hedge with the Smolder Blind as well as gaining good team fighting with the Rumble, right? So it makes so much. It achieves a lot of the different needs of the comp contextually based on the draft. And I think teams that are able to go for these high execution based drafts are usually the ones that are, they clearly have signs that they have the gameplay to follow it up, right? So, and you can just tell it does go pretty south in the early game, right? Because on paper, it's just like a lot of these champions are just very strong. It makes sense, right? It's very challenging. It's going to be very hard to be able to make plays, make a dive onto a Braum or something, right? So let's find some examples, right? Look at the Fnatic comp. It's too. It's like it's good, but like look at this Renekton Braum. It's like the early game is very hard to play around, but you're giving up the creativity factor, right? So Fnatic have more tools in the playbook, although each tool is weaker. But because of that, they're able to use the right tools for the job, and if they can identify that well, then that makes them that much better of a team. And we've seen this out of teams like T1 in the past, where they just draft comps that like don't really make sense, but they scale with how good you are. That's like a forbidden scaling, right? Like these champs get better the better you are, and sometimes these drafts are just allowed, and that's what I mean by Fnatic just being able to still come out ahead no matter what, identifying how they want to play out this game, and using their agency to basically command every fight. So I'm looking for another example of a fight here against BDS on Baron as it loads. Right, so they get good conditions here. Obviously, BDS, on paper, stat-wise, is much stronger, right? But Fnatic, the X factor is the capability, right? Paris on the Braum, he's just going to be able to play defensive, right? They're just going to play defensive, play front to back, but they're second to the objective as well. Fnatic with Rel, with Vi, with Rumble, like they have so many options for target selection. They can play the fights basically however they want and make snap decisions. And when these factors within a team comp are what's going to be able to set you apart, right? If you're a team that can make use of this creativity, you definitely should. And despite of how badly the early game went, clearly they're very unified in terms of the fighting. They have so many different angles they can go for, and I think that's why they were able to come out on top, right? So give one last example before we round this off. Oh, this last fight here, right? So they just have more tools. They're playing for bot T2, and BDS, they have advantage. Their conditions are slightly better, but there's not much else they can do. They trade the advantage for the lack of ability to answer. So you can see here, the only thing they can really do is just keep poking. This is a poke comp, and it's not bad, but all it takes, Fnatic, they're trusting themselves being the better team. All they need is to find the right conditions for a fight, right? And they're just waiting. They just need the enemy team to fumble, right? And here you go. Mickey, he finds his engage, right? Braum can't really do that. You just have to play around it. You can be very specific. You can choose exactly, just cherry pick exactly how you want to play this fight. They pick their right targets, and this is just what every team needs to do. So, clearly, it's objectively speaking, you go back to the draft, it's probably 65-35 in favor of BDS, like straight paper, but it all depends on the team, and that's why I wanted to point out with this video, and that's why I think draft is very subjective based on the team style. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.